Well, a very good Monday morning to you here on the Reid Revolution. I'm John Reid, and I am in New York City today, where I've got a couple of meetings coming up in the next couple of hours, and then a big event tonight with thought leaders from a lot of media outlets across Manhattan. So this could be an interesting conversation. The last time I was up here, they were focused on how anti-Semitism is on the rise in the United States and in the Republican Party. And I think that's concerning that so many people are beginning to see this. I dismissed it. I got to be honest with you. I kind of thought, I just didn't encounter that sentiment when I was running for lieutenant governor. I was all across the state, but then I was just in Virginia. Now, maybe it's a good thing that in Virginia I didn't see it and I didn't feel it during the campaign, but I'll be curious. Once you've been in a cocktail party setting and everybody kind of raises an issue, maybe that makes you a little more sensitive. So I can't deny that I've seen some things like that as I've been on the internet and interacted with people, all across the country. I still don't think it's a big issue, a pressing issue in Virginia. Fortunately, thank goodness. I mean, we don't need any more of that kind of hostility in our environment. Now, we are waiting on speaking of Virginia, we are waiting on a ruling from the court in Lynchburg related to the gerrymandering issue. We're going to talk to Delegate Tim Anderson a little bit about that. And then, of course, we are continuing to watch all of the fallout from the attacks on Iran. Wow, you can tell that I'm kind of rigging this up here. We're still waiting for the fallout after the attacks on Iran. And I've been kind of shocked by the reaction from a lot of folks who don't seem to approve of what President Trump has done. I mean, these are people who are all in for Donald Trump. And I think they believed him when he said, no more foreign wars. I don't think we're in a war. I think he has taken action against an enemy to make sure that they don't get a nuclear weapon, which is pretty important because these are the people who have, for 47 years, said death to America, death to the West, death to the great Satan. And I think they mean it. And if they've taken out probably thousands of lives of individuals that they have terrorized or had killed over these many decades. And if they get a nuclear weapon, minimally they'll want a seat at the table where you have to deal with them in a different way. But listen, I think they're religious crazies, and they would love to usher in the death of millions of Westerners, of millions of infidels. And I don't think we have we've been very blessed in America that we haven't had to deal with the realities of the radical Islamic movement around the world. Europe has faced it in ways that we haven't had to face it, but it's been an academic conversation for Americans. And with the rising number of adherents to Islam in the United States, and a percentage of those people, not everybody, but a percentage of those people becoming radicalized and becoming of the belief that the infidels deserve to be either converted or killed. And I know that's shocking to Americans because we just don't live that way. But that is the mindset of a lot of people around the world. Dealing with Iran in this way, and the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, I think is long overdue. And I am very pleased that President Trump has taken the action that he's taken. Is it complicated? Is it expensive? Is it horrible to see the damage? Yes. But I don't live in a fantasy world. I live in the real world. And I think that a lot of American leaders haven't had the guts to do what needed to be done to try to protect our people. Hans von Spakovsky is with us this morning. He's been following these stories for a very, very long time. What was your reaction, Hans, when you heard the news that the president? I mean, I think we knew this was coming. It was just a question of what day, and then on Saturday, the action was taken. What you think? And good morning to you.
Well, what I was thinking was it was about time.
Mm-hmm.
Look, for 50 years, Iran has been the foremost sponsor of terrorism in the world. It has killed either itself or through the proxy terrorist organizations it has kept supplied with weapons and arms, including Hezbollah, thousands of Americans. And anyone who doubts that if they developed a nuclear capacity, that they wouldn't use it either against Israel, other parts of Europe, or even if the U.S., if they could smuggle it in, obviously has no grasp of reality. This was needed. And for those who say, oh my gosh, we're going to get stuck for years, wrong. Um, what they're doing is they're decapitating the political, military, and secret police leadership of this country and degrading its military capacity to the point where no matter what happens, whether the military takes over, another dictatorship forms, or democracy actually is formed, they are not going to have the capability to do what they've been doing for a very long time, and that's the key to this.
I think it is a fair question to ask who does replace this tyrannical religious regime. I mean, is there an heir apparent that is prepared to step in and take over the basics of governance that will be better for the United States and maybe even for the people on the ground in Iran? Or are we just kind of betting that the people have had enough and they'll figure it out on their own? That's a big bet.
Look, the key question always in these kind of situations and revolutions is whether uh, is the military going to use its remaining power to take over and force some kind of military dictatorship, or is there a big enough resistance to prevent that and try to establish a democracy? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think there actually is an heir apparent. I don't think the son of the former Shah, yeah, maybe he can initially be there for a transition, but he's got no governing uh, uh, experience. So I
Or
just don't think.
infrastructure on the ground.
Yeah, I just don't think he can do it. But again, yeah, we should be concerned about it. But look, we're not going to put big forces, boots on the ground like we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, because I think Donald Trump realizes that was a big mistake.
Mhm.
In both of those cases, we should have done the same. Decapitate the political leadership, destroy their military capacities, and get out. Trying to bring a 14th century culture into the modern world, that is a losing proposition.
Yeah. When you look at the damage that's been done, the deaths so far, American deaths so far, how do you evaluate that? It does not strike me as it strikes me as a successful operation, even with those deaths, and that I hope I'm expressing appropriate sympathy for our fellow Americans who have been in the military who've been killed. But this looks like a successful operation to me.
Oh, oh yeah, and look, it's still going on, but it clearly already is been very successful. Yeah, they are launching missile attacks on our embassies and other locations, but they can only do that for a very limited amount of time. One, because of the overall damage being done to them, and in particular because of the damage being done to their control over those features. Look, every time they launch a missile, we have the capacity to find out where it was launched from and then destroy that
Take
area.
it out.
So they only have a very limited capacity to strike back, and we're continuing to damage and destroy that.
What's been your reaction to other nations and their statements about the American action here?
Well, I thought it was interesting that the United Kingdom finally cleared the use of our American bases in the United Kingdom for this. And, they have a fairly liberal government over there, and yet they, I think, finally agreed. You've even had a small number of Democrats speak out and say, look, this has been needed, and the president's doing the right thing. Anyone who objects to this does not have a grasp of reality, the dangers of uh, Iran and its achieving a nuclear capability, and all of the deaths it has caused by being such a sponsor of terrorism. Anyone who's against this probably thinks that Neville Chamberlain was a great um, prime minister in England.
If they even know who Neville Chamberlain was.
Right.
And I think I have to tell you, Hans, watching the reaction from younger Republicans and younger conservatives
Right.
who, I want to be careful here because I'm not trying to be overtly rude, but I had to check a few of them and say, how old are you again? You're 28 years old.
Right.
No disrespect, but you haven't been tracking what's happened for 47 years. You haven't traveled around the world and suddenly found that there have been terrorist warnings that have caused you to have to change your business plans or your vacation plans because somebody from Iran decided that they'd put a fatwa on you or someone you knew, or that just generally Americans had to watch themselves. You can't name the names of the Americans like Robert Steedham and Mr. Klinghoffer and these people that we watched murdered over these decades. What do we do with that group, though, that I think is very sincere and passionate in their desire for the United States not to be aggressive overseas with military action, certainly not long-term military action, and their reaction to President Trump is to feel betrayed by this.
I think all we can do is try to educate them because they obviously have missed the kind of education they need in history, and particularly looking at what happened in the 1930s when the Allies could have acted very early to stop Hitler and refused to do it. And that's the kind of re-education, frankly, that they need to make them understand that, the term peace through strength, that's a real term. It's one that really applies to history. And if they don't know that history, then they are going to repeat the terrible mistakes that occurred in the past that led to the unnecessary deaths of millions of people.
Yeah. I mentioned I'm in Manhattan today for a couple of meetings. I got here yesterday afternoon, and I was walking around with my head on a swivel because I do think at some point there are going to be acts of retribution in the United States, maybe from people who are here already, who, I don't know why we haven't taken their threats seriously over the last few years, but it appears to me that there's a rising group of radical Islamists in our own population. And this may be an opportunity to ferret them out and invite them to leave the country, in my opinion.
Oh, look, I agree, and it might be an unfortunate and tragic lesson for those who think we ought to have a completely open border and completely open immigration policy and realize that we need a much stricter one that is much more interested in security and ensuring that individuals who are going to become domestic terrorists do not get into the United States.
Is there an appropriate, legitimate, legal way to vet people to understand that? I mean, and this is controversial to say, other than saying we're not going to allow anybody of this faith from this part of the world into the country. Is there a legitimate, reasonable way to try to figure this out before something bad happens?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the ways is something, I don't know if you recall this, but prior Democratic administrations told the Department of Homeland Security, for example, that it was not allowed to review social media posts by individuals who are applying to come in. The Trump administration fortunately changed that, but that's the kind of investigation. A lot of people They're very revealing in what they post, and
Hmm.
frankly, anyone who you find social media posts who are praising, for example, Hamas and other terrorist
Right.
groups, they should not be let into the country. That's just plain common sense, and that's the kind of thing we need to be doing in the immigration area.
Yeah. Maybe some retrospective reviews of that would be important. I
Yes.
when I worked here in Manhattan, Hans, I was doing a radio program up here on occasion. I was shocked by some of the people who were working for the sister station. I was doing conservative talk, and there were a couple of other stations. And I remember on 9/11, the anniversary of 9/11, one of the young women came in and said, "Oh, I bet you're going to talk about a 9/11 today." And I said, "Well, yeah. I mean, that's it's the big anniversary, and I would think people here in Midtown would kind of be mad if you didn't talk about all the lives that were lost." And she went on to talk about what a glorious day it was for the martyrs, not Americans, but her comrades or allies. And I remember kind of being shocked. Here's a woman who has a good job, who's living here in the United States in Midtown Manhattan, who is bold enough to tell the guy who's about to host a radio talk show on 9/11 that what happened there was good and just and that we deserved it. And that always has been in the back. This is 15 years ago. This has always been in the back of my head. Like, how did this woman get in, and how has she
Right.
managed to stay? And how many people like her are living right down the street that I
That's
don't
right.
know?
I mean, look, that is a problem, John. And what's even worse is all of the advocacy organizations, for example, that have gone to court to try to prevent the current administration from removing individuals, aliens who are here on visas and otherwise, who are vocal supporters of terrorist groups like Hamas.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, judges have been giving in and refusing to enforce immigration laws, which allow us to remove aliens with those views. That is an ongoing problem that's going to feed into the kind of potential attacks that you were just talking about.
Yeah. Hans, I really appreciate the chance to talk to you. Hans von Spakovsky, Advancing American Freedom. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, John.
Thanks very much. All right, let's take a break, and we'll be back with more of the Reid Revolution in just a moment. You need to play him now. Play him. Okay. Back here on the Reid Revolution on this Monday, I had a chance to talk to my friend, the former delegate, Tim Anderson, about a lawsuit that he's filed in Lynchburg, and we may be about to get the results of that this morning. So much to talk about on this Monday, but one of the big issues that everyone in politics and in government and in business has been tracking is whether we're actually going to have this gerrymandering referendum that the Democrats are jamming through, or whether someone in the courts is going to step in and make the Democrats obey the rules that they themselves set up. Tim Anderson is a former member of the Virginia House of Delegates, and he's the attorney who's kind of driving the resistance movement, if you want to put it that way. And he's with us this morning. We're expecting to hear some sort of ruling this morning that could derail the whole process. Tim, what's the update?
Good morning, John. So last week, the city of Lynchburg, by resolution, voted to hire me to represent the city in a municipality dispute with the Commonwealth. And what they're in limbo, as is every municipality, because we have a order out of Tazewell that tells the Department of Elections that it can't prepare for this election. And so the Department of Elections has gone dark. And the way our system works in Virginia and elections is you have the Department of Elections up here, and then in every locality, there's a local registrar. And that local registrar is basically the lieutenant carrying out the orders of the general. The general in this case is the Department of Elections. Well, the Department of Elections is offline, and in Lynchburg specifically, the registrar emailed the elections people and said, "Hey, I need guidance," and they literally wrote him back and said, "We can't give you any. Do the best you can with what you have." That's insane, because obviously different localities may act differently in some cases, and in certain places, some have just said they're not even going to do it. Campbell County passed a resolution, we're not going to do it. Spotsylvania passed a resolution, Wythe County passed a resolution, and so we have all these counties going in different directions, and there's no guidance from elections. And so Lynchburg hired me and said, "Look, we want the courts to tell us what to do. We need the court to declare what our responsibilities are here. We need the court to answer some important constitutional questions." And so we spun all that up on Wednesday and filed that with the courts. And we had an emergency hearing Thursday morning in Lynchburg. We were in Lynchburg for about 5 hours, putting on evidence. And, I mean, a lot of people think that the law is like that. And it's not. It's not like it is on TV. There's usually a lot of preparation and getting people ready. And all this came together at record speed. So it was me versus the Attorney General's office, and then another lawyer who represented Don Scott in the Tazewell one case. She was there, and another lawyer with her. So it was me versus three. And we put the case on, and the judge was. They threw everything at us. They threw sovereign immunity. They threw venue. They threw the non-judiciable controversy. They threw everything at us multiple ways, multiple times. I was able to deflect all of those and back, but the judge had ample opportunity to do anything to even delay our case. Could have done anything on Thursday, but after it was said and done, he submitted it. He asked us to all to write, which we all did. We were all up until midnight over the weekend, writing and submitting. And now we are in a position where he said he's going to rule today at 11 a.m. And that's our thing. And the judge is going to make some very, very critical and important decisions before that apply to Lynchburg. But when he does, it's going to really give a lot of guidance to the rest of the state, especially the municipality. We argued, what does 90 days mean? Which is something that you and I have talked about. The Constitution says that you can't submit a ballot on a constitutional amendment any sooner than 90 days to a voter. And the constitutional amendment passed on January 16th. That means that 90 days from then is April 16th. But they're going to be submitting those ballots as soon as March 6th under the current schedule. And, the Democrats are saying, well, that's because the election is on April 21. So that's the date that counts. And what we're arguing is that when you vote on March 6th, you are irrevocably voting. You can't take that back. You're answering the question. And the Constitution says you can't do that. The Democrats also
These are the rules the Democrats agreed to from the beginning. They set the rules here. They're the ones who set up 45 days of early voting. They're the ones who have put the parameters in place. And they're very clearly just trying to jam this through and come up with excuses to get it started.
Well, that's right. And so our Constitution was enacted in the 70s, and there was no 45-day early voting in the 70s. And so the words say shall not be submitted to voters any sooner. And then, obviously post-COVID, they ran these 45 days of early voting through, which is fine. I mean, if that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing. But the question still remains, what does submission to voters mean? And we think it's pretty clear. Early voting can't start any sooner than April 16th. Can't start on March 6th. And that's a big deal for reasons we can talk about in a minute. But then the other big thing is that the entire election schedule is over a House bill, House Bill 1384, which creates all of this. This is the bill that Abigail Spanberger was laughing when she was signing, that we saw the viral video of her, her first bill that she signed. So 1384 does a lot of things. It suspends all the laws that prohibit what they're doing right now. It suspends all of them. It sets up the date of April 21 for early voting, or for the election day. It sets up the money. And what the Democrats did is they called that a general appropriations bill, and general appropriations bills become effective immediately. But it's not a general appropriations bill. And so we argued that, and therefore it doesn't become effective immediately, even if the Democrats call it something, even if the Democrats say it's effective immediately. It's not. It's not effective till July 1. And in that case, then
what's the difference? What is the distinction in the way the General Assembly runs?
So in order for something to become immediate, that's not an appropriations bill, you have to have 4/5 of the General Assembly vote for it. It's called an emergency clause. And they didn't. They got party line votes. So they did not have 4/5 votes. And so they literally titled it appropriations bill, but it's not the bill, the Appropriations Act of the 2026 General Assembly session. And so they've literally done everything to sneak around and work around. And so we argued at the hearing that it's unconstitutionally passed, and that mattered. The judge already kind of ruled on that, because one of the provisions of this bill is that no circuit court can litigate any of these issues except for Richmond. And so the Commonwealth was trying to move it to Richmond, and we said you can't do that. You can maybe do that after July 1, but you can't do it today. And the judge agreed with that and kept the case. And so he's already leaned into the idea that 1384 is not valid. And if 1384 is not valid, this whole election is invalid. And that's what I've been saying from the beginning. This whole thing is so illegal and unconstitutional, how they've done it, how they've got here. They've cut corners. They've done everything they can. And we're just asking the court to say it, that you can't do it. I mean, he asked me in the hearing, he asked me two questions. He said, well, he asked the other attorneys who said they can't even intervene. The other attorney said the judge can't even intervene in this election. And the judge said, well, what if the question was only men vote? No, nobody else, just men. Do we have to wait for the election to go through and then decide that was improper, or can I stop that? And then even their side said, well, that's different, Your Honor. Well, that's crazy, because it's not different. Because the Constitution, we're talking about a different part of the Constitution that they don't want to talk about. But he talked about that. But then he asked me, he said, what's worse, a imperfect election or no election? And I said, I think it's a third option. I think an unconstitutional election is the worst thing that we can do in the Commonwealth. Having voters vote in something that is so defective that it has to be set aside is worse than anything. And I said, we're not trying to stop the election. We just want it to be done correctly. They've got to do it in the proper steps and the proper procedures. And really, they probably can't even do this until mid-August.
Right. Which would then be too late for the gerrymandering and the rigging of the federal elections that is their ultimate goal.
That's right. That's exactly what this is about. If we don't have elections till August, then on this constitutional amendment, they can't rig the election this year, and that's why they're ramming it through in the timetable that they're ramming it through.
But in a practical sense, that also means that the candidates that you currently have, the incumbents and the people who are already announced that they're going to challenge the incumbents, Republican and Democrat alike, would still run, and the people of Virginia could decide whether they like those people and whether they're going to use them to send a message to Washington or to Donald Trump. I mean, you still have an election; it's still valid. It's just with the established lines.
And with the established lines, it should be noted that Abigail Spanberger won Rob Whitman's district, won Jen Kagan's district. So if if the will of the voters in these currently drawn districts is that they want to send Donald Trump a message, then there's still plenty of voters that could do that in the current lines. They don't have to pull all these. Look, they're putting Goochland, where you are, Goochland, into Arlington. I mean,
Which is crazy.
It's shocking.
Yeah, geographically, it's a huge distance between those two places. They have nothing in common. They're all the rules of good map drawing for legislative representation are thrown out the window because they're trying to anchor it in quote unquote blue areas so that they can rig the election here. Do you think that the Democrats, when they put this through, just figured that the Republicans were going to be lazy or listless and not challenge them aggressively like this case is doing?
We've not really seen Republicans engage like we're doing right now in the past. And I think that they made a calculus that it didn't happen. And look, it's not just me. The RNC brought a new lawsuit in Tazewell, which is before the Virginia Supreme Court. And, you had Terry Kilgore and Ryan McDougal bring the first lawsuit in Tazewell. And so, it's not just me. There are other people out there fighting for this. And I don't think that the Democrats anticipated that was going to happen. So, it's great to be part of something. We also saw John McGuire and Rob Whitman file a lawsuit in Richmond, which has not moved yet, which this is why they wanted it to get stuck in Richmond. It has not moved. Their lawsuit is about restoring fairness as to whether or not that is a constitutionally valid question. Hasn't moved, and that's why the Democrats, tied all this to have to be filed in Richmond, is because they knew they could bury it out there. And before an election, once the first vote is cast on Friday, if courts haven't stopped this, we're in big trouble. But what we expect out of Judge Yates today in Lynchburg is some kind of direction. And I can't promise anybody who's watching your show that it's going to go our way. But what he's going to have to answer is what does 90 days mean? Does 90 days mean 90 days, or does 90 days mean 44 days? And so we're going to have to see what he says. And if he says 90 days means 90 days, which we think he will, I'm hopeful, praying that he will, then Lynchburg's not going to be able to have an election by court order. And that's going to create some chaos in the entire election. And I don't know how they could legally do it. I think the Supreme Court would then have to act. They've not ruled on anything at this point. I think they would have to act as to whether a statewide injunction is in place or they're going to stay the order out of Lynchburg. But I think the Supreme Court would have to do something before Friday if the court enjoins Lynchburg from moving forward.
And if Lynchburg, if the judge in Lynchburg does put some sort of stop here, does it only apply to Lynchburg? That was one of the issues in Tazewell. Was originally it appeared to apply just to Tazewell, and then there was this it seemed like confusion from the people I was talking to about whether the whole state had to slam on the brakes. How does that work?
It does only apply to Tazewell. And it does, though, apply to the Department of Elections overall, where they can't even provide voting books to the registrars. That's one other thing we talked about. Like, the registrars are going to have to use the November voting books, November 2025. And certainly people have
they're
died.
out of date.
Yeah, certainly people have died. Certainly people have moved. Certainly new people have moved in and registered. None of that's going to be, it's all going to be completely, off by months. And so, that's a big issue. But when a city is told by a court you can't proceed, and you're going to now take 58,000 voters out of the equation by court order, not just the registrar or anything like that, but the actual city is offline. I think that will cause the Supreme Court to have to rule one way or the other.
What's been their reticence in this? I would think that for their own reputation and for good governance, they would feel obligated to have stepped in to clear all this up weeks ago.
Well, it's just a general theme that courts don't want to get in the middle of elections. They want people to make their own decisions. They don't want the courts to put thumbs on the scales of political questions. That's a bedrock theme in courts, and so that's not uncommon. But like I told the judge, I said, let the people vote. That's fine, but let the people vote with a correct procedural question, not something that was just ran through for political gain by one party. And that's what's really gross about this is, they're trying to say restoring fairness when they have literally broken every rule that matters. Every rule that matters has been broken by the Democrats. This is such an illegal process that we've got to see something come out of a,
Yeah.
of a high court of what we're supposed to do here. And I think ultimately this thing's going to have to stop. It's just going to have to stop. And then we're going to have to let everybody do this the right way. Like I said to you before the other day, there's three other amendments. There's the abortion amendment, the gay right marriage amendment, and the voting amendment. And I don't like those amendments, but they all were correctly, at least. They were all passed in year one and year two, and they're going to go on the November ballot. But those are done right, and we're going to have to rally people together to vote accordingly. The gay marriage thing. I don't have any problem with gay marriage, but I do have problems with them putting gender into the Constitution or courts to tinker with that as a constitutionally protected class, because gender is a problem, obviously.
They know what they're doing with the wording there. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So there's all these things that we have to that are spinning, and I think if Lynchburg punches the brakes at 11 o'clock today, just a little bit from now, we're going to see something very big happen in Virginia.
Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing us up to date. We'll be monitoring that throughout the morning. I suspect that while we're focused on this huge issue, and it is a big issue, and I'm glad that the RNC, the Republican National Committee's finally paying some attention to what's happening in Virginia, because it's going to have huge impact on them going forward and on President Trump and his ability to get anything done in the last 2 years of this term. What else is happening at the Capitol? I see on social media these large classes that you're teaching for concealed carry permits, and some of my friends who are very big in the 2A community are beside themselves. What are you tracking that we need to not let slip under the radar?
So there's a bill. I can't remember the exact number. I think it's Senate Bill 114. It's 115. It's something it's 110. It's in the teens, between 110 and 120. That it has passed the Senate and has gotten through a subcommittee in the House and is now in appropriations. And essentially, it's going to allow the Attorney General in Virginia to revoke reciprocity agreements with other states. So our concealed carry permit is about to collapse, assuming that this becomes law. But this all started back in 2016, back when Mark Herring was the Attorney General, and he just unilaterally decided he was going to revoke reciprocity agreements because he's the Attorney General. This is going to codify what Mark Herring did and allow the Attorney General to do it, although I think the Attorney General can probably do it anyway. Our Virginia permits work in other states like North Carolina, West Virginia, Tennessee, Florida. They're going to go through and revoke. We have 30 states our permit works in. It's going to get revoked probably down to 6. So what we're doing is I'm teaching the Utah concealed carry class all over the state, and by plugging into Utah as a non-resident, you get access to all of Utah's states, which are 35 in total. And so people are basically hedging that their Virginia permit is probably not going to be very good anymore, and getting the Utah permit so that when they travel, they have something that works in other places.
Isn't it remarkable that you can't count on the legislators in your home state to protect you as a law-abiding citizen? They're going to try to strip you of your rights and turn you into a felon should you cross an imaginary line from state to state. And you've got to take these extraordinary efforts to protect yourself. It's pretty important. Tim Anderson, a former member of the House of Delegates, I appreciate the fact that you're being so aggressive on on all of these issues, but especially this one, which has national ramifications if it goes through with the gerrymandering that the Democrats are pushing. Thanks for talking to us, and we'll check back in with you later this week.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Pretty remarkable to be in this situation. And thank goodness there's some people who will go to the wall on this. And in all fairness, this is not a case where Tim Anderson and the Republicans are just fighting to fight and gum up the works and throw a monkey wrench into things. They're asking everybody, the legislature, the governor, the judges, the Board of Elections, the local registrars, could you just read the plain English of the law and follow it, please? And, let me compare it to something that people do seem to care about, sports. If this was the Super Bowl or if this were the World Series, I think people would be very adamant that you actually obey the rules that are written in the rule book. And they wouldn't be turning their head saying, well, we'll just work this out later. No, I mean, the game's being played right now. And we need your ruling on this, and it needs to be factual and not just based on emotion. And I think the courts, we'll see what happens today, but I think the courts have been letting us down. And the Supreme Court's decision, look, who wants the Supreme Court to get in between the voters and the will of the voters? I concur with that, but that's not what's happening here. The Supreme Court is allowing something to occur that is wrong. I mean, it just is based on what's written down in the law. There is a process. It's very clear. It's not like, ooh, wish we had thought of this part because this has kind of put us in an awkward position. I mean, the law sets up a calendar, and I get it. The Democrats don't want to follow the calendar. They want their way. I certainly understand that. And Republicans don't want this to proceed. But it's not based on just us not wanting it to proceed. It's actually based on, are you going to follow the law or not? And I think we're in dangerous territory when you've got judges who step back from their job, which is not to put a thumb on the scale, but to look at the law and actually follow the letter of the law. This is where we're falling apart all over the country. And I would have expected more from Virginia. So we'll see what happens as we continue. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more in just a moment on the Reid Revolution. You're back on this Monday, the Reid Revolution. I'm John Reid in New York City today, getting ready to have a whole afternoon of meetings. So bear with me as we try to make this thing work. Producer Dan is back with us to talk about some of the news of the last few days. How are you feeling about everything, Dan?
Well, I couldn't be happier about what happened over the weekend. I think that Iran has posed kind of like what Hans von Spakovsky said. I love his name, by the way, Hans von Spakovsky. What a name. But Iran has been the danger, the great danger to Western civilization for almost half a century. And the fact that it's taken this long is troubling, but I'm glad that it was done.
Have you looked this morning whether Ghazala Hashmi has said anything about this?
I have not seen anything from our esteemed lieutenant governor at this point.
So, I wonder what she thinks. Anybody got the guts to ask her for her reaction to this, since she's made history as the first Muslim statewide leader in Virginia, minimally. I mean, wonder what she thinks. Is she for protecting Americans, or does she have dual allegiances here? She doesn't think this is a good idea. Wouldn't we find that interesting to know how she perceives this?
Well, certainly no shortage of Democrats who have come out in opposition to what happened. I think that's a terrible indictment on their part, but yeah, we've had everyone.
I want to know whether this woman who ran on Making History has an opinion about what's happened, and whether she's going to stand up for America or whether she's going to have dual allegiances here and be defending the Iranian Islamic regime. I think that would be a very interesting, illuminating thing to discuss with her. I'm not even really interested in a press release from her, although that would be a start. She issues press releases about just about everything else. So
Right.
I think a good reporter today should ask her, find where she is at the Capitol, and ask her directly with a microphone in her face what her opinion is of protecting the United States of America and American freedom against a radical Islamic regime. And I would bet you that you will not get a clear answer. And that should, let's see. But if she doesn't have a clear answer that's supporting freedom in the United States, and she defaults to her normal answer about Islamophobia, like asking her that question demonstrates Islamophobia. No, it's the same question we would ask anybody if they seem to maybe have some sort of connection to people who are engaged in a conflict. Let's see. I'd be very curious to know. Anybody going to do that? I doubt it.
Somebody just said, ask Mamdani. Mamdani has already said that he was against what happened. So
that's correct.
So, yeah. I mean, it's I mean, Mike, maybe John, this will hit home for us. Maybe we could get AI Ghazala to give us her
maybe. Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I'll be curious to see whether we've got that information tomorrow, whether there's any kind of statement tomorrow. And I would encourage folks to call her office and ask her that question, ask her staff that question. That's a very legitimate concern, especially since she is the one who has celebrated her rise politically. There's a downside to that if she's not 100% on the side of the United States. And you see Mamdani, the same people who funded Mamdani becoming the mayor of New York, funded her campaign and supported her. And so I think we should know what we're getting. What's the thought? She's going to run for governor in 4 years. We need to know what the answer is to that. So we're getting close to the end of the time here, Producer Dan. Don't you think we should probably say goodbye and we'll pick everything up tomorrow?
Yeah, that sounds good. We will continue where we have left off for today tomorrow.
That's fantastic. All right, thank you very much. Give us a like and a follow on our social media outlets on Facebook and across the social media spectrum, and we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a great Monday.